not ashamed of me. Till then, nor is my boasting vain. Till then, I boast a Savior slain, and oh, may this my glory be, that Christ is not ashamed of me. And oh, may this my glory be, my glory be, my glory be, that Christ is not ashamed of me, is not ashamed of me. Please be seated. Mark your hymnal to number 634. Number 634 will be the song of invitation.
I was told to walk up here slowly. The central triumph in all of life is the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. More important than any other occasion, any other day, any other single occurrence that has happened in all of the world, in all of its history. The greatest of all, the greatest triumph ever won was Jesus coming forth from the grave. There are many things about Jesus that all men would have to admit. The evidence for Jesus having lived is overwhelming. There is more written, more evidence to show that there was a man named Jesus who lived 2,000 years ago than there is for many that we just generally take for granted as having lived and existed. The evidence is overwhelming that Jesus lived, that He taught, that He performed miracles, that many followed Him, that He was crucified, that He died upon a cross, that He was buried, that there was a number of soldiers that were used to guard the tomb and to keep Him in that tomb. And there are many who understand and who believe that He was taken from the cross by Joseph of Arimathea and put in a tomb that he borrowed for 3 days. There were somewhere between, depending on how you number the soldiers, there were somewhere between 15 and 60 soldiers that were charged with guarding that tomb to be sure that no one did anything with his body. That no how, no way were they to allow that body to disappear from that grave. And yet, early on the first day of the week, the stone was moved, and Jesus arose. Now, unbelievers and skeptics have many theories as to what happened. I almost laugh when I read some of these because they are hilarious to me. There is a theory that is called the swoon theory, that Jesus actually didn't die. He actually went into a coma while on the cross. You see, we can't deny that he was on the cross, and we can't deny that he was buried. We can't deny those things because there is so much historical evidence that such took place. But this resurrection we deny. And so, what happened was Jesus simply went off into a coma, and he was taken down from the cross thinking he was dead. They laid him in the tomb, but in that tomb, it being cool and moist, he awoke, he arose, and he escaped. That's one of the foolish arguments that's made concerning what happened to Jesus. The second argument that I found trying to deny the resurrection of Jesus was this vision. And the argument is that people believe so strongly in the resurrection, and they believe so strongly that Jesus was going to be raised from the dead, they in their minds, they envisioned that he did. And so they went out crying out to everyone that Jesus had arisen because they had seen in a vision or in a dream or in some way, they had come to the conclusion that Jesus must have arose. And so there's that. Perhaps the most foolish of all was the one I read that said that what happened was that Jesus never arose. He was left in the tomb, and that all these people were so fired up that he was going to rise from the dead that they all had this hallucination. And so all of these people at the same time had this same hallucination. And even more than 500 had this hallucination at the same time. And the idea that you had that many people hallucinating is just, it's beyond words to me. Then there are those that say, well, what happened was, he didn't rise from the dead. What happened was the disciples came and stole his body. And then they went out and told everybody he arose. But folks, the disciples didn't believe he was going to rise. Those women went out early that Sunday morning, and they went out not because of the fact they were going to witness the resurrection of Jesus. They went because they knew he was dead and that he hadn't had time to be prepared for his burial, and so they went to complete the process for his burial. They went expecting to find him in the tomb. Then there's the argument that it wasn't the disciples that stole his body, it was the enemies that stole his body. But if the enemy stole his body with the intent of being able to prove that he didn't rise, why did they not produce that body when the disciples were going about proclaiming that Jesus had arisen? Wouldn't it have been a way to stop this Christianity and keep it from ever getting off the ground? If these apostles and others are going about saying Jesus arose, he lives, and all they had to do was bring the body out and say, no, he didn't, here he is. But they couldn't because he arose. They couldn't because he arose. And so as hard as you may try, as much as you may say or try to find some way to get around the resurrection of Jesus, there's no way around it. Now, there were many in the first century that denied a resurrection of the dead. The Sadducees didn't believe in a resurrection. One of the unique things about them was that they denied the resurrection. In Acts 23 and verse 8, Paul knew that, and brings up the resurrection, and causes dissension among the Jews, because the Sadducees denied the resurrection. Those in Athens, in Acts chapter 17, when Paul preaches to them, the thing that turned them off and they said, "We'll hear you again sometime," was the fact that he brought up the resurrection. They didn't believe in a resurrection. The very idea that there'd be a resurrection from the dead. Go back and read 1 Corinthians 15. That's that great chapter on the resurrection of Christ. And notice that part of the reason why that is written is because there were those in Corinth that were denying the resurrection of Christ from the dead. And the argument is being made, if Christ did not rise, then we will not rise. And if there's no resurrection of the dead, we have no hope. You may also remember that Hymenaeus and Philetus in 2 Timothy 2, 17 and 18 were denying the resurrection and were preaching such and were condemned. There is so much evidence that Jesus arose that no reasonable individual can study the evidence and deny that Jesus arose from the dead. First of all, I would tell you that others have been raised from the dead, so why would you deny Jesus could be raised? In the Old Testament, there are occasions where there were those who were raised from the dead. Elijah raised a widow's son. Elisha raised the Shunammite's son. Jesus raised at least 3 from the dead. Peter and Paul raised 1 from the dead. And so there were those who could see and witness a resurrection from the dead. So why would someone deny that Jesus would be raised? Life after death is something that has been taught from the beginning. Enoch did not suffer death, but was taken in Genesis chapter 5, verses 21 through 24. Abraham believed in a resurrection so much that he was willing to take his son Isaac and kill him, slay him, sacrifice him. Because the Hebrew writer says that he had such faith that he believed that God from the ashes would raise that son up, because God had promised him concerning that son, and he believed God. He believed in a resurrection from the dead. David believed in a resurrection. David, when that son died, that son that he and Bathsheba brought into the world, when that son died, David said, "I can't bring him back from the dead, but I can go to be with him." David knew there was life beyond the grave, life beyond this life. And so over and over through the Scriptures, there's evidence of a resurrection. Daniel in Daniel 12 and verse 2 talks about the resurrection of the dead. And so there's overwhelming evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. That resurrection was foretold. That passage in Psalm chapter 16 and verse 10 where the psalmist said, "For thou wilt not leave my soul in hell or Hades, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption." Prophecy was made that he was not going to be left in the grave, that he was going to rise from that grave, that he would live beyond that. Jesus told us himself that he was going to rise. He tells us in Matthew chapter 16 and verse 18, "Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell or Hades shall not prevail against it." What do you think that's a reference to? Hades is not going to be able to hold him, is what he says. In Acts 2, when Peter and the 11 stand up and begin to preach their message, especially when you get down to verses 25 through 31, the message is that this same Jesus that you've crucified, God's raised him up and set him on the throne. He is now King of kings, Lord of lords. He is that Messiah. He is that one. Jesus indeed foretold that He was going to rise, that He would live beyond the grave. Jesus foretold of the resurrection of the dead. He told us that He was coming back, that this death would not be the end. There would be more to this. Do you know how much evidence there is, biblical evidence there is, that Christ arose from the dead? Brethren, His death and burial are plainly stated in the Scriptures. Inspiration plainly says that He died in John 19 and verse 30. In John 19, you get down to verses 33 and 34, and the soldiers affirmed that He was dead. When the time came to break the legs of those that were on the cross, to try to speed up the death process so that they wouldn't be on the cross on the Sabbath day, Jesus was already gone. He had already died. He was taken and was buried by the disciples and secured by a Roman guard. There was no doubt in anyone's mind but that Jesus had died. There is overwhelming evidence that He died, because unless He died, there can't be a general resurrection, a genuine resurrection from the dead. But you find an empty tomb on that morning. And there has to be some reason why the tomb's empty. Disciples weren't expecting it to be empty. Do you know that when they came and ran and told that the tomb was empty, that two of those disciples ran to the tomb and found it empty? And they went not because of the fact that they were convinced that He had arisen as He had said He would, but rather they are confounded because what's happened to Him. They said, "What have they done?" Believing that someone had taken Him. Someone had done something with Him. You may remember that the women, when they were going that early that morning, Sunday morning, you may remember that when they went, as they got closer, they were wondering how they were going to get the stone removed, and they were amazed that it was gone, that it was moved. More amazed that the tomb was empty, and looking for answers. They couldn't understand why His clothes had been folded. Not as if someone rushed in and took the body and ran out with it quickly, but rather, in a very simple way, had taken the body and folded the clothes that were left and placed them there. There's some questions that the skeptics can't answer. You know, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, he talks about how that 500 at one time saw Him alive after His crucifixion. In John chapter 20, he plainly says that 500 saw Him. Witnesses that were competent, strong in their faith, that had no doubts of what they had seen. As a matter of fact, many of the witnesses had been skeptics. You remember reading Luke 24, and you read where two men are walking on the way to Emmaus, and as they're walking along, they're met by this one. And they're walking, and they're so despondent, they're so upset, because today was the day they thought Jesus was going to be raised from the dead, and it didn't happen, and so they're all upset and feeling dejected and down, until Jesus revealed Himself to them, and they recognized that Jesus was the one walking with them. These were skeptics. Rather, many of the ones that had to say Jesus arose were people that didn't want to say that. didn't want to believe it, wanted to be able to deny it. Finally, you've got someone by the name of Saul of Tarsus that is doing everything he can to destroy this Christianity. And a voice from heaven says, "Why persecutest thou me?" And this one now, who had been an unbeliever, a denier, someone who was so radically opposed to Christianity that he was having Christians put to death just because they were Christians and believed in Christ. This one now knows that Jesus arose. And from that point forward, he's preaching a resurrected Messiah and trying to get others to see that Christ arose, that he lives. These witnesses spoke boldly of what they had seen with their own eyes. They could not be led to deny what they had seen. They believed it with all of their hearts. You know why this is so important? You know why the resurrection is so important? Number one, my faith depends on it. Your faith depends on it. Christianity is a system of faith. Hebrews 11 and verse 6 says, "But without faith it's impossible to please Him, for he that cometh to God must believe that He is, that He is rewarder of them that diligently seek Him." Not a person here has seen Jesus with a naked eye. Not a person here has been an eyewitness of the resurrection. So we must rely upon the evidence that is laid out. And we know that He arose because the evidence is far greater for the resurrection than for the denial of it. The evidence of the resurrection is the very central theme, the core of our faith. What do you say in 1 Corinthians 15? If there be no resurrection from the dead, we're of all men most miserable. And wouldn't it be a miserable existence if there's no resurrection from the dead, if this is it, if this is all there is? You see, if Christ isn't risen from the dead, then our faith is vain. It's empty. It's useless. Our preaching is a wasted effort, wasted time. If there is no resurrection, then Christ lied and is not the Messiah. The apostles were all false witnesses of the resurrection. But, if He arose, and He did, then our faith is not vain. And our faith will sustain us and help us through life. Our salvation depends upon the resurrection. If there's not a resurrection, then we have no reason for even being here. Baptism is a reminder of the death, burial, and resurrection. Our sweet sister, new sister, died to sin, was buried with Christ, and arose to walk in newness of life, a new creature in Jesus Christ. Every time someone is baptized, it is a reminder of the resurrection of Christ from the dead. The death, burial, and resurrection of Christ from the dead. Do you also understand that if Christ was not raised from the dead, then we have no hope of being raised from the dead. Brethren, there's no hope of life beyond this one. If Christ isn't raised, if He's not alive, if He's not sitting on the right hand of God, my resurrection depends upon His. Read 1 Corinthians 15 and read especially verses 13 through 20. Because if Christ wasn't raised, I won't be. And if He doesn't live, neither will I. And the lively hope or the living hope that I have rests in the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 through 5. Brethren, there's coming a resurrection. It's been promised. Daniel promised it back in Daniel chapter 12 and verse 2. Jesus promised it when He was telling His disciples He was going to be put to death. John 14, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again, receive you unto myself. That's the resurrection. That where I am, there ye may be also. There's the promise of the resurrection. There's the promise of the resurrection. There's a promise of that life beyond. Our resurrection is a promise. And God, who cannot lie, promised it. We know there's life beyond this. We're going to be raised to everlasting life. Not this life we have here and now. Not this meager existence that we have. Not this life with all of its troubles and trials and difficulties. But those who have done good are going to be raised to the resurrection of life. Jesus said in John 5, 28 and 29. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, Paul says that those who have died in the Lord are going to meet Him in the air and ever be with the Lord. There's a resurrection coming. In one of these days, I won't have this old corruptible body that wears out and tears down and ultimately returns to dust. One of these days, I'll have a body that's glorious like that Jesus has. Paul longed for that. Philippians chapter 3, verses 20 and 21. He was looking for something far better than this one. It's also the reason we keep working and doing everything we can do to try to persuade men to come to Christ now. Because just as surely as the Christian is going to be raised from the dead, so will the unrighteous, the unbelieving. In Revelation 1:7, there's a very sobering statement made when it says, every eye shall see Him. When Jesus returns, every eye shall see Him. They that have done good, resurrection of life. They that have done evil, resurrection of damnation. But this life isn't the end. There's life beyond. And as surely as Jesus rose from the dead, you and I will rise. And though life may come to an end, and it will if the world stands, someone going to take us to a cemetery somewhere or going to dispose of our body in some way. But no matter what you do to the body after it's gone, no matter how you dispose of that body, it's going to be raised. The word cemetery is a word that literally means a place where people sleep. Go back and look at the the original meanings of the word. The word that carried with it the idea of a place where people go sleep. Place of rest, but it's a place where people are going to wake up. Sleep's not something that's fearful. Commonly, we don't go to sleep afraid. It gives us rest, gives us peace. And to think that when life here is over, I go to sleep. I'm laid in a grave somewhere. My remains are taken care of somewhere. And that no matter what is done to the remains, that one of these days the Lord's coming back. And with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, trump of God, we will rise. And as surely as Jesus arose from the dead, we will. I found it interesting how many different ways the Bible describes that day. He talks about it as being precious in Psalm 116:15. A precious day. He talked about it as being a day that's better than the day of one's birth in Ecclesiastes 7 and verse 1. He talks about it as being a day of gain, not of loss, in Philippians 1:21. John said it's a blessed day in John 14 and verse 13. Acts 7 and verse 59 says it's going to be a day when the Lord will receive my spirit. And in 1 John 3, 1 through 3, it says it's going to be a time when I'll be given a glorified body. And in 1 Corinthians 15, beginning in verse 50, he talks about it as being incorruptible, immortal, eternal. It's a day of ultimate victory. The resurrection from the dead. And as surely as Jesus arose, and He did, you and I will.
If we don't suffer death because Jesus comes while we live, we're still going to be raised to meet Him. There's life beyond this. What we have here is only a taste of what is coming for the Christian. Isn't it good to know this isn't the end for the Christian? If you're not a Christian, this is not a pleasant thought. Because as surely as there is the resurrection of life, there's a resurrection of death. All of us are going to live somewhere when this life's over. And eternally, we're all going to face, we all do face the choice of heaven or hell. But we will live beyond the grave. Where are you headed? Where are you going? What's life to you? You headed to heaven? I hope you are. I pray you are. I pray that with every effort, you're striving to do what's right so you can go to heaven when life here's over. If you're not a Christian, we beg you to become one because we want you to be ready when the Lord comes. If you're one of God's children, you've gotten yourself out of step, we beg you to come home while you have time and opportunity. If you need to come, if we can help you in any way to prepare yourself for your resurrection, won't you come while we stand and sing?
The great physician now is near the center.
634. All glory to the dying Lamb. I now believe in Jesus. I love the blessed Savior's name. I love the name of Jesus. Sweetest note in seraph song, sweetest name on mortal tongue, sweetest carol ever sung, Jesus, blessed Jesus. His name dispels my guilt and fear, no other name but Jesus. Oh, how my soul delights to